So thank you for joining us tonight. This is Angel 101, the first of 6 educational sessions that we'll be holding this year. Last year we held 2 Angel 101s, received a lot of good feedback, made a couple changes, and then decided to add subsequent education sessions to take some deeper dives. We have a schedule which is on everyone's table here of the 6 subsequent courses. If you already have these on your calendar, please double check your calendar because we have made a couple changes in terms of dates and also locations. We tried our best to have each event at a new location, ideally a open, large, friendly, warm location. And our last location is pretty big. We're going to have the full ballroom at the Tinkham-Veal Center at Case, and we hope we'll have 100 or more entrepreneurs joining us as well. So it should be a lot of fun. Each course should build on the last one. And we hope, like tonight, to have a good combination of both North Coast members and non-members. Before we move forward, we wanted to do 3 important things. The first is to thank the Burton D. Morgan Foundation for their sponsorship of this entire session. So I hope you'll join me in thanking them. For those of you not familiar with the Burton D. Morgan Foundation, they're a 50-year-old local foundation based in Hudson. They support entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship education and are an important part of our being able to make this accessible to a large group of individuals. Number 2 is that despite the generous support of the Burton D. Morgan Foundation, this event is not totally free. We are asking that as an exchange for joining us tonight, that each of you fill out a feedback form. The good news is it is short, just half a page, but this is how we understand if this is what you want, if this is interesting, if it's challenging, if it's the right level of detail. And as you'll notice here, we're also asking you to circle which of the later deeper dive sessions you're interested in. This will be the first test marketing for us to understand which of those sessions are most interesting and get a sense for how we should be planning them in the future. So please do complete the surveys before you leave here today. And lastly, if anyone needs an inducement to stick around until the very end, we have a door prize. And that door prize is a bottle of Angel's Envy. Despite our frequently talking about this particular bourbon, they are not a sponsor of ours. We do not get paid in any way, much to our dismay. But Angel's Envy is appropriately named. We often partake in it to celebrate the wins, to cry for the losses. And what we're going to do for those who are here tonight, because you have to be here to win, is put an extra copy of everyone's name tags in a hopper. We'll pull one out and someone will walk away with this bottle. With that, we're going to move forward into the agenda. This will be a very fast-moving agenda. As you can see, we have a lot of information, a lot of topics, and a lot of people packed into a relatively short period of time. We've done this twice before, and we've stayed on time. The way we've done that is fast questions, fast answers, and fast pace. So by the time we get to the audience section, we'll ask you to do your part as well and keep that pace going. We're going to have a very brief overview and introduction to angel investing in Cleveland up front. We'll then have 3 separate panels focusing on, 4 panels rather, due diligence, how we approach validating and vetting these companies, deal terms, how we try to structure an instrument whereby we can invest, what happens after the investment, and then everything else. And we will take questions after each panel. So here's the basics of the who, what, when, and where. The who is all of you. So in this room we have members of North Coast Angel Fund who are active angel investors who are independent and are not part of North Coast or any other group, and people who are thinking about becoming angel investors or entrepreneurs in the region. I came from earlier tonight, as many of you did, a Techstars event which talked about community, which talked about engagement, and that's an important part, something that we probably haven't articulated as well as we should have, but over the years, but something where we'd like to better bring in a broader group of people to this activity beyond simply the people who are members of our group. The what for us tonight is technology-oriented startup ventures. We define that as software, healthcare, IT, and then some limited medical companies, and some limited electronics and controls, as well as advanced materials. The where is very important. Cleveland. In Northeast Ohio, the the early stage ecosystem is different than it is in Pittsburgh, in Northern California, in New York. So there are going to be some place-specific things that we talk about in terms of opportunities, strengths, weaknesses, and deal flow. The when is early stage, often seed. So we invest as a group post-idea. If it's at the idea stage, it's too early for us. We don't have the resources typically to put around them. If it's at a point where they have $5 million in revenue, that company's probably too late. They're probably in a scaling mode already. Our sweet spot as a group, and we think the sweet spot for individual angel investing in Northeast Ohio is pre-seed and seed stage investing, pre-institutional institutional venture capital. And then lastly, the why is for a couple of reasons. One, to make money. Two, to win with Cleveland-based companies. And three, to have fun. If either of those elements is missing, it's probably not going to work. So for those of you in the back who can't see the bottom text here, it says if we pull this off, we'll eat like kings. So this is a big idea, like most of the ideas we try to invest in. Like most of the ideas we try to invest in, this also isn't going to work, right? For ideas that, for reasons that we can see. But it's a community sport, a team sport, entrepreneurship, and angel investing. It involves big ideas and the willingness to fail, and that's part of the culture which we try to support. In Northeast Ohio, there are a number of players. The Angel Fund is just one of many. To look at North Coast for a moment, though, we've been around for 10 years. We have over 200 individual members, physicians, entrepreneurs, technologists, and general business people. We've invested in almost 50 companies over the past 10 years. We've had a couple of very nice wins. We've had a number of failures. And we've had a number of companies which are developing very nicely, some of which you might hear about in the panels. It's a long-term endeavor, but from our perspective, it's rewarding because we get to see companies like Assurex and Zenode make it through strategic sales and acquisitions. We get to see companies like OnShift, which is downtown, have 200 employees, 25 million in revenue, building a terrific national company. And that's a big part of why our members get excited. It's important, though, to understand where we are. Like many of you are probably thinking right now, when I first saw this slide, I was thinking, where's Cleveland? There are all these big bubbles. We see Silicon Valley, we see San Diego, we see Texas, we see New York. Cleveland doesn't have a city-specific, let alone even Ohio, having a state-specific bubble. There's a lot of venture capital out there in the country. We're a small part of it. We hope what we're doing will be a larger and larger part of it, but we have to understand the resources which we have available to us. And the resources are actually numerous. I'm sure all of you are familiar with Jumpstart in town, which is a supporter and partner of ours. There are a number of economic development groups, venture capital groups, family office, early stage individual investors. And for entrepreneurs to be successful in Cleveland, money is just one part of it, and we're just part of that capital. So we hope if we communicate one thing tonight, it's that we're part of a larger continuum of activities, both as fund investors and also as individual investors, but there's a great deal we can contribute to success. The opposite of success is, of course, failure. And we talk about this here because investing is really hard. Any of you who've been entrepreneurs, who've been early stage angel investors know that companies can and do fail for a wide variety of reasons. In the type of investments that we make at North Coast, we fully expect at least 50% of the companies will fail over time. And failure typically results in 100% loss of capital. Companies fail because the business idea or the market simply doesn't develop the way we might have thought. The solution to that problem might not be nearly as powerful as we had hoped. The team simply might not be able to made the changes and adjustments that we need on the fly, or sometimes we're just beat by a better competitor. There's a lot of reasons why things cannot go well. We try to arm companies with not just capital though, but with resources so that they can get over some of these humps when they see it, when they see these issues over time. At the end of the day though, it does come down to team. We bet on individuals, and we really count on that individual CEO, that founding team, to build the company over time and really to deliver success. We maintain engagement through being advisors, through being board members, but at the end of the day, 90% plus of the success of the company is going to be driven by the founders. So we often talk about the horse versus jockey analogy, right? Would you rather have the very best jockey or CEO and only a pretty strong horse, or would you rather have the strongest horse, the company or the product, and just a pretty good CEO? In reality, you need both to be highly successful. Unfortunately, many times as angel investors, we make compromises on both sides. We would love to have CEOs that have all had 3 or 4 successful exits, that are experts deep in their industry, that have all raised venture capital before, and we'd all love to be investing in first-in-class products that have an advantage over what else is in the market. When you invest early, that's simply not a luxury we have. So we try to understand what are the challenges, what are the relative strengths of each company. So some of the things that we have to go in understanding are just that entrepreneurs are optimists. We have to try to help them articulate to us what the reality on the ground is, help them be honest with themselves and with us, and then help them articulate that to their teams and their customers, we hope, in order to set the right expectations going forward. Most entrepreneurs, if they're doing this for the first time, don't necessarily know what they don't know. The deck is stacked against us in this early effort. Not knowing that sometimes isn't a terrible thing, or not being as focused on it. But we try to make sure that entrepreneurs understand how risky this is, what the impact of success or failure is, and some of the things that we're doing to help them be successful. Part of it is also patience, because there are very few overnight success stories in angel investing. To the extent there are any, we've seen one. We had one very lucky situation in our second fund where we had an 8-month exit. We'll probably never see that again. What's more typical is a 5-year, 6-year, 8-year type effort. It almost always takes more time and takes more money than we as investors think and as the entrepreneurs think. So if anyone here has been approached with an investment proposition, they've probably seen something like this, a hockey stick. We pulled this randomly out of our old file. We probably have 500 such hockey sticks over the years. And what it really represents is plan A. It's not disingenuous thinking. It's not even wildly unrealistic. It's just plan A. This is what will happen if everything goes right and goes well. We've never seen plan A go right from the get-go. Our most successful companies so far, Gerace, which was a terrific win over 6 years, they missed budget for the first several years. Sales developed more slowly, the plan developed more slowly. Things were very promising, but to hit your projections from day one is something that probably isn't realistic and isn't fair for us as investors to use as a measuring stick. There we go. So taking a quick look here, this is data that has come out over the past several years from the Angel Resource Institute. As you can see, exits are stratified. A very small number of exits on the right drive the majority return for the fund. The good news in early stage investing is the worst you can do is lose all your money in one given investment. The best you can do is to bring back many times your capital. And that's really what we see here on the right, that a small number of exits, 10x to 30x or greater, drive the majority of return for the funds. So we're going to talk more about diligence in a moment, but we try to break it down to common sense steps, especially at the early stages, because we don't have years of data, we don't have substantive financials, we don't have full teams of people to evaluate. But we try to understand, is there a substantive problem that is being addressed? Is there a meaningful solution that is being brought to bear? is the team up for the challenge? Is there IP? How do we feel about the competition? None of these are rocket science type items, but it's really the bread and butter of what makes successful diligence. So things are changing, not just here in Northeast Ohio, but across the country. There used to be far more investor control over deals. There are now more smaller venture groups. There are hundreds of angel groups. There are crowdfunding sites. There are sites like AngelList where entrepreneurs can establish visibility to investors across the country. We really have to be ready to evolve and to change with this, and we think we have. There's been a later stage shift in many of the venture capital groups, so they're investing a little bit later. There are several drop-off points where at a Series A, there are far less investors to fund a company than there are at a Series C, so naturally there's going to be a drop-off, and that's part of a challenge we have to prepare our companies for as well. And then terms and access to capital is something that changes over time. We'll talk about this a little bit in our deal and deal structure panel. So if we lose all our money most of the time, and it takes 10 years, why do we do this, right? Why do individual angels invest? The reason is if you develop a portfolio, it can work, right? We've seen exits that are successful in our portfolio, in the region, and beyond. It's a phenomenal way to learn about ourselves, about different subject matter. We've looked at deals in genomics and life science, in enterprise software and architecture. It's a phenomenal social activity actually to meet and engage with a lot of really interesting people. Many of those are the entrepreneurs themselves. And it's a way to give back and to create opportunities here in Northeast Ohio. But as I mentioned right up front, if we don't think this activity is going to make money, win based on local companies, and be fun, it's not something we should be doing. So that's why we do it. With that, we are going to ask our first panel to join us on stage. This will be a conversation about diligence. We'll start out by asking each of them to give a 30-second introduction on themselves, tell you a little bit about their background. We'll dive into questions, and then we'll go to the audience for follow-up questions.
He gave me the mic.
This is our esteemed panel. Thank you all for joining us, being the first to be in the hot seats here.
Esteemed, I like that.
Yes.
My name's Mike Hammer. I work for AG Interactive, that's the online division of American Greetings. I'm an angel investor. I guess I could call myself a VC because I'm in the venture fund as well. I invest in sidecars as well as the funds. And I invest independently in startups. And I guess that's about it.
Great.
My name is Michal Soclof. I'm a member of Fund 3 here and heavily involved in the due diligence and the screening committee. I also work with Matrix Equities, where I handle technology venture investments in multiple disciplines. We do a lot of work in real estate, but also in technology and many other investments. Actually, we just made our first investment in the food industry. So heavily involved both privately, professionally, and through the fund. My background is in software development and engineering. I've worked at many types of companies, from startups to research institutions and to large corporations.
My name is Daniel Luketic. So in addition to being the one who floods many of your inboxes, I am the director of North Coast Angel Fund. The work that I do, a large part of it is working with the diligence teams, these small groups of 4 to 5 members that work through a diligence process and make recommendations to the broader membership about which companies we'd like to make investments in. For the 10 years prior to joining North Coast Angel Fund, my entire career has been in the trenches with startup technology companies. So that has taken me to places like the Youngstown Business Incubator, Dan Gilbert's Business Accelerator in Cleveland, immediately before I joined North Coast Angel Fund, I'd actually partnered with an insurance agent, and we brought a company and a product to market that was helping independent insurance agents manage their errors and omissions liability exposure.
Great. So Mike, let's start with you. And if you could just share with us, as an individual, so outside of the North Coast, how you think about what types of opportunities you look at in terms of space, stage, and any other relevant areas.
Okay, well, first off, I'm an angel because I can't afford to be a VC. So that points me towards earlier stages in companies. I tend to be fairly picky. A lot of investors, angel investors, just kind of go, oh, that's a good idea, yeah, I'll put some money in. And they hope. I try and mitigate risks. So I'm looking at the downside, I'm looking at the upside. I'll digress a little bit. Anyone in the room familiar with Tomas Tungas? Yes? No? You should be. He's a VC at Red Point Capital, and he puts out the most amazing blogs analyzing startups, software as a service, things like that. So his most recent one was about whether or not investment capital is spreading beyond the major Silicon Valley or New York, whatever, and it turns out it's not. And he includes graphs, and if you look at Ohio, it's a very flat graph, almost at zero on that scale. That's not to say that there's not activity going on, but it's indicative. So I do a lot of thinking and analysis. One of the things I'll say is the average marriage lasts like 7 or 8 years. If you're an early stage investor, you're going to be in bed with that entrepreneur longer than you're likely to be married.
I'll just let that sink in for a minute. So, Michal, we'll pass on to you. So you mentioned technology, real estate, and you just did a food deal. How do you think about doing deals that are so broad in scope that I presume you feel you don't have an expertise in all those areas? How do you address that?
So I address it in multiple ways. If it's something that I'm working on for North Coast, our due diligence teams have been assembled with really high talented members. And a lot of the membership has a wide range of experience. So if it's in software technology, engineering, speech recognition, which is one of my fields, I'm very comfortable analyzing and asking questions. But if it's something more specific, even within that field, I'll defer and ask questions to another member on the team. If it's from the private investments that we do, we really go within our networks and outside our networks to find that kind of expertise. You're not going to be an expert in every field, and yet in order to build a diversified portfolio, you want to diversify into multiple areas. So using our own network, if it's a biotech type investment, we have colleagues and friends that are bioengineers, and we'll talk to them. In the case of the food, actually our daughter is a food scientist, so I brought her in, and she did a very intense, very impressive analysis and was involved with me in asking the questions to the entrepreneurs. So reaching within your own network, both personal and professional, is probably the best way to do it, because one of, I think, the hallmarks of being an intelligent person is knowing what you don't know, or an area that you're not comfortable making the call. And so in that case, look around, ask around. Usually people are very interested in offering their opinion and their experience, and in some cases would actually be potential investors. So I think it helps everybody.
Great. And Daniel's seeing hundreds of deals each year. How important is the CEO, the founder, from that first moment of evaluating them?
I'd say very important. So it's probably one of the top things that we evaluate. And when we're looking at a CEO, a founder, I would say that we're primarily looking for somebody who is super smart, right? High intelligence level, because we know that with a lot of these companies, just from our portfolio experience, and then if you look more broadly, like Todd mentioned, we see a lot of hockey sticks, but rarely is that the path that the company takes. And so needing to have someone who is not just individually super smart, but capable of putting together a team of super smart, highly motivated people that can react to those bumps in the road, make adjustments that we know are going to have to be made, and lead that company forward is key. And I'd say if we were just throwing out, 3 traits maybe that we would try to focus on, in addition to just being super smart and being able to put a team together and manage that team. Obviously perseverance is key, right? Being able to stick with it and seeing some level of commitment that gives us comfort that they're going to see this through. Laser focus. I think it's pretty easy for a lot of these entrepreneurs to also be distracted or not be completely focused on that core value proposition that they initially had identified, or that presents the greatest market opportunity. And then the final one is kind of back to the super smart piece. Is this someone who is listening and learning? Is this someone who is willing to listen to their investors, their customers, the market, and adjust accordingly? So if you know anyone like that, we'd love to talk to them.
So one more I'll throw in is the ability to execute. You can be super smart, you can persevere, but if you can't make those decisions and carry them out and get other people to buy in and carry them out, odds of failure are going to be much higher.
No, like what? As well, and I think it's the ability to pivot. Meaning, if you see an opportunity that you didn't initially expect or that's coming at you, make that change. And I know Sam's going to be coming up, and I remember when he told us about his previous company, didn't end up where they started. And I won't tell his story, but that is the hallmark of a successful entrepreneur. Another one is Yuval, who we've invested in as a fund. In his original company, he was out to work on a piece of software that would help you make it through your doctor's office faster when you were waiting and trying to figure out why you're still there 2 hours later. Ended up being a scheduling system for your cable and other service people. So identifying that your original idea, the concept may be great, but the real execution is going to come through in the ability to pivot as to what the market is asking and demanding.
So Michal, while you've got the mic here, how formal or structured is this process of diligence with you, a team, and an entrepreneur?
I think it's a combination. I think it's a combination of formality, meaning you do have to vet the entrepreneur, as Daniel was saying. Is he or she super smart? Do they have a great team around them? Do they have the right financial model? Do they have a right analysis of the actual market? Have they identified a need? But it's also the intangible and the less formal in how they interact with you. And I find it's very important to meet the entrepreneur in person. In rare cases have we gone through a full due diligence without interacting with it and doing it only electronically or in conferencing. There's a reaction and a feel that you get for seeing the way the person answers a question. Are they feeling confident? Are they very excited? Are they able to answer the question, even if they don't know the answer, by being completely honest about it? And admitting what they don't know and admitting what they do know. And really identifying the risks. So a lot of times young entrepreneurs, especially the younger ones, will put up that hockey stick and that's all they want to talk about. What I really want to know is what are the risks? What are the dangers? What are their fears? And when they're communicating out to you, even in the state of due diligence, they shouldn't just talk to you about all the wonderful things they want to do. They should clearly identify the risks in the market and make sure that they have a plan and ability to manage that.
And Mike, could you just share with us a couple red flags, right? As you look at these deals, what tells you, that this shouldn't go much further?
Okay, so you've already heard entrepreneurs dream big. So are you buying into their dream or are you buying into their hallucination, right? That hockey stick, the total addressable market is gazillions, right? They're gonna overemphasize the positive. And so you really have to distill what is reality, what is hope. Can they tell the difference, right? Every entrepreneur that approaches you for money is optimistic. But is it grounded in realism, or is it really just not grounded in reality? So red flags are where you get those mismatches between what the numbers, what you're seeing outside of their story don't match the story that they're telling you. Every entrepreneur has an exit story, right? Somebody will buy us. But will they? Why will they buy that company? And exits generally take longer than you anticipate, right? So my best investment, I'm going to digress slightly, was in 2011. We actually did very little due diligence. We did invest in some follow-on rounds, and now we're doing very well with it. But the question is, when will there be an exit? What will it look like? So we're just kind of hanging on for the ride, because there are very large companies, startups, that end up failing over time, right? So.
And Daniel, how do you know when you're done? How do you know when diligence is complete, you're at a decision point?
After 30 days has passed, we're done. That's the answer. So, it's the perfect amount of time. No, we have recently really analyzed our diligence process, and maybe 6 investments ago, we sat down and we said, we have some of these projects that are carrying on for 60 days, 90 days. And are we doing better diligence in those days beyond 30 days? And what we found was we were just delaying the no. It was just spending more time to get to a no. Essentially, the team's gut feeling and decision was made in those 30 days, because as we looked at it, 30 days is a good amount of time in our case when we're putting a team together to assemble that team, to have a good look at the diligence materials, a standard due diligence data room that the investor puts together, have plenty of time to talk to a handful of subject matter experts if we don't feel like we have the expertise on our team, have, Michal mentioned, a number of interactions with the CEO and their team face-to-face to look them in the eye and hear how they're thinking about the risks and everything else. And then ultimately to have some team-only discussion, put our heads together, say this is what we have found. Is it a yes or no? Do we feel positive about this? So 30 days, perfect amount of time.
Great. Questions from the audience? Harry?
This isn't a question, it's just a comment. I think a lot of you know John Houston. He started the Ohio Tech Angel Fund, and one of John's statements was when he sees a company's business plan, he knows how they're not going to make money.
Rex?
I'll ask one, which is 50% of these companies go on and fail. If you go back and look at the 50% and compare that back to due diligence, what was the greatest shortcoming in the due diligence that you wish you had known during due diligence?
I would say a few points that I would make. One is that we were talking at the beginning what you're looking for when you're looking at a company, and a lot of that is the market. So as I was saying, the market. I think the most interesting companies are the ones that identify a problem that the market doesn't know it needs. And the ideal, and obviously the typical one, the penultimate one, is Steve Jobs. He changed the paradigm of how we interact with every device that we use, how we think about music, how we think about communication with computers and also with each other. But on a smaller scale, it happens every day. When you focus too much on the market, I think sometimes you miss the opportunity. And you may say no when you should have said yes, but I'll reverse that as well. Sometimes you'll take it because of the market you think that exists, but actually it wasn't hit right on. The two other aspects that I think are very important are, one of the questions that Todd asked me to think about was regarding what do you see when you talk to an entrepreneur, and what are the 2 signs that you don't like to see, or what you would recommend they show you? I always like to see a prototype or a demo. If it's a software company, I want a demo. If it's a biotechnology company, show me a working prototype, even if it's made out of cardboard and tape. Because you've taken the idea that you've dreamt about and you've tried to make it actualized. And when that doesn't happen, a lot of times the failure will exist. You may just be looking at a deck that came out of Excel or out of Photoshop, but no one's actually sat down to try and build it. That, I think, is one of the biggest failures. The other one is to always be aware about buzzwords. Meaning, we see a lot of entrepreneurs that come and they love to throw out AI, machine learning, natural language processing. Those are my top 3 because I'm the one that always calls them out, because I've done work in all those fields. And when I catch them on it, I always say, don't put them there unless you truly know it, you've built it, and you believe it. You may say eventually, I would like to do some adaptive learning, some natural language processing, but don't try and throw a buzzword at me and think I'm gonna buy it, because then you're actually not giving me a lot of credit. And that is a big failure point. If you buy into the buzzwords because you think you wanna be in a company that does that, dig pretty hard and dig pretty deep.
All right, well, thank you very much. We're going to invite our next panel up. Our next 2 panelists, both were at the previous event which I was at. Both drove very quickly to get here, I'm sure in full observance of all traffic laws on the way. And we thank you for hustling to get here for the second event, and we'll ask for your introduction.
Sure. Hi, Rem Harris. I'm with Jumpstart, where I oversee Jumpstart's 3 funds. We have 2 $10 million seed funds, one $20 million Series A fund. The 2 seed funds are very similar to the North Coast angel funds, and our later stage fund is very similar to the North Coast Venture Fund. We're investing at the same stages, same types of companies, and mostly the same geography as well. By way of my background before joining Jumpstart, my career has been in business. I've started 2 non-tech businesses that I ran for about 8 years. One that I wound down, the other that I sold out my interest to my partner. Went on to the corporate world, spent a number of years with Lockheed Martin in Los Angeles, and then Cleveland was calling. So I wound up coming to Cleveland in 1995 to join a tech startup. I was heading sales and marketing there. We had 0 income when I got there. Grew it to about a little over 8 million in 5 years, sold it twice along the way. I left after the second sale and went on to do other things, spent some time at Highland Software, and been with Jumpstart now for the last 11 years.
Hi, Charles Stack, as you can see. I start companies. I've always started companies, going back to when I was in 6th grade. Didn't even know it. I started a Christmas tree sale company. And I've probably done, between personal companies I've started and the Flash Starts Accelerator that I founded, I've probably started 150 companies and probably thought about starting 15,000 companies. It's you know, idiot savant comes to mind. It's all I know how to do. Don't ask me to do anything else. I live as far upstream in this space as you could possibly live. I don't have a team. I'm not sure I have an idea, but I might. And that's my conversations almost every day with the entrepreneurs and the startups that we meet with. So take that into account when you hear what I say. Nobody lives further upstream than me. And it'll reflect as we talk about deal terms and how much they do or don't matter and what we do and don't look for.
Great. So first question for Rem, and this is pretty basic, but for the typical angel investment, if an angel writes a check for $10,000 or $25,000, they hand it over to the entrepreneur, what do they receive in return?
So it's pretty amazing. What you're going to get is going to be maybe a piece of paper that says that somebody owes you money or that you own a percent of a company. So you'll own a small portion of a company after you write a check. And thinking about the data that Todd shared at the beginning of the presentation, you're along for a ride. The longer the ride, probably the better the prospect for a return.
And then Charlie, debt or equity, what do you prefer to see as far as an initial structure?
So it's a funny question because we've switched almost every year. We started out with equity, and then we switched to convertible notes. We switched back to equity. Right now we're on equity. And I have a really specific reason that we're doing equity now, but it has nothing to do with anything else. So it's just a particular opportunity that we see in the market to focus on equity. I think most early stage deals now are probably convertible notes. And that's what, as an angel investor, you'll probably more often than not see. At the end of the day, they're really not all that different. I'm a big fan of standardized terms and forms on both. And if you use standardized terms and forms, when you go to take your exit or your liquidation, the result's pretty similar.
How important is valuation at the earliest stage? So if an entrepreneur is selling an equity deal, an investor writes a check for $10,000, how big of a deal is it if it's a $1 million pre-money versus a $5 million versus a $10 million?
So my answer will reflect how very, 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 very far upstream we are. It matters less for us, and we have way more leverage than other investors do because of the unique situation of being an accelerator and being, for almost all of our startups, the only money they see. And we've gone to extreme lengths not to take advantage of that. So we have pretty fair terms. Valuation, we do $50,000 for 8%, which puts the companies at a very low sub-$1 million valuation for most of them. So it's not terms that most angel investors would see, because you would see them further along. I highly, highly recommend the Halo report, which is published by the Angel Capital Association every 6 months now, I think. And they will tell you exactly what the average terms are for an angel deal in the Midwest in technology or healthcare or whatever. And I would just, it's a free report, I would just subscribe to it, look it up, and rely on that. And when you're meeting with an opportunity in which you might invest, to throw that out there and say, you're 30% above the average for the Midwest, or you're 10%, you may not say you're 10% below, but it gives you a very clear benchmark, and then the startup or you would need to argue why that particular opportunity is higher or lower than a really reliable benchmark. So I think that's easy to use. But again, we're so far upstream that most of our companies will fail, and those that succeed will be in the 20x range. So the valuation matters, the precise valuation matters way less.
Rem, at the seed stage, what is the role of a lead investor, and how important is that for angel investors to think about being part of a deal?
So I think having a solid lead investor is really crucial. And I say that because we've seen over the years many what I'll call angel-funded companies, exclusively angel-funded, or sometimes called country club, doing the classic country club rounds or rolling rounds, where they go and talk to a friend and raise 10,000, talk to somebody else and raise another 25, and over time they've raised quite a bit of capital, but haven't really structured the deal correctly. There's two key things, or potentially more, missing. Market-based deal terms, probably a market-based valuation in many cases, and third, adequate or appropriate governance, and this is formal governance that a board would bring, But maybe more important, the informal role of a board, which is really to be an advisor to the company. So I like to think of a board as being an extension of the team. Founders should think of their board in that way as well. And without a solid lead in place that has an understanding, one, and appreciation, two, for this governance function, companies oftentimes are inadequately resourced to go on and accomplish what they need to achieve over the next 5 to 7 years.
I know we're alternating, but I wanted to combine that question with the first panel and talk about diligence. We have at Flash Starts, we have a really opposite. Daniel talked about 60 days. We've gone the entire other way. We now have a Flash Starts Labs program where we will bring the companies in for 6 months without investing. And we have the luxury of having a large co-working facility called Start Mart. So we'll bring the companies in there and literally work elbow to elbow with them for 6 months before we invest. And as was pointed out earlier, there is no better form of due diligence than daily exposure. So while we still do formal diligence on the markets and the team and their backgrounds and all of that, those are all really dwarfed by working with an entrepreneur and his or her team for a 6-month period. And we get very comfortable with both their strengths and their weaknesses. And on the lead part, because again, we're so far upstream, we are always the lead. I don't think of a situation where we've ever not been the lead. And we do a lot what North Coast does and allow the people that invest in our Flash Starts fund to invest in sidecars as well, relying in a sense on our due diligence and our lead status.
And Charlie, I shall keep going with you. So you mentioned the idea of a lead investor, how important it is. For angel deals, it's not uncommon to be presented with a deal where there's not a lead investor, right? Where the paper you're presented with was developed by the attorney for the entrepreneur. How is an individual angel who's not super experienced, not an attorney yourself, how do you get comfortable that that paper is fair, gives you the right protection, and is something that fits, assuming you like all the other aspects of the company?
So I'll go back to the Angel Capital Association again, this time not the Halo report, but they have standard deal terms that they publish. And they are, again, extremely even-handed and fair. They are not, you might think that they might be heavily pro-angel and anti-entrepreneur, but they're really not. They went out of their way to make sure that the terms, the standardized terms that the ACA promulgates are extremely fair. So depending on the level of diligence you want to perform on the terms, you can compare clause by clause what you're presented with in either a convertible note or an equity subscription with the standardized documents from the Angel Capital Association. It's probably a good exercise anyway, because in addition to standardized documents, there is a great deal of, on the ACA website, a great deal of explication about what each term means. And while not thrilling reading, is at least educational.
I suppose you could also go to the deal terms educational session on July 11th.
Yes, held by North Coast Angel Fund. Where are we going to be holding that?
Excellent. On July 11th, it will be at Westwood Country Club.
Westwood Country Club, right in time for golf.
Excellent. Questions from the group?
You've used the term sidecar investor several times. Could you talk in a little bit more detail what that looks like, how it impacts the original investment, how it might be structured?
So I said earlier that I should have said I put on a lot of hats. I'm a member of North Coast as well. So on the North Coast side of the equation, it's extremely well organized. So North Coast will do their due diligence. They'll decide to make an investment, and then there will be an opportunity for members of North Coast to invest on top of that. So the due diligence is performed. You've seen the company present once or twice. You've seen the diligence team present their findings, so your level should be pretty high. And then it's a question of, do you like this idea? Do you like the team? What's your own opinion? And you can be pretty sure that all the P's and Q's are in line and the I's and T's are dotted and crossed. And then you can just invest alongside North Coast. Is that accurate?
Yes.
So how do you value a company, especially for companies that are pre-revenue?
Yeah, that's a great question. If anyone here can answer, please step up. So it's a little bit, it's a little bit art and science, and it really depends upon the field of technology. There are a handful of rule of thumb methods, and at the earliest stages, it's understanding whether you have, one, a strong team. We've heard about that before, strong, capable, knowledgeable in the space, and totally agree that you want to back the person. Fundamentally important, and the earlier you invest, the more important that is. You want to believe that there's a big market opportunity and a real problem in the market, and you want to believe that there's a solution being created that solves that problem. Along the way, there's different validation points, and those look all very different if you're looking at a life science company versus a software company versus any other form of company. And generally, the higher the challenge to create the technology, meaning creating impactful therapeutics, is really hard to do. Creating software is relatively simple. You're going to look at the strength of the IP, strength of the team, market potential, and land on evaluation. And it can vary by stage, by industry. We typically are seeing companies in the 2.5 to maybe 5 or 6 million pre-money valuation when we're doing deals, and my guess is that's pretty consistent with North Coast deals as well.
One more question?
Yes, how, when and who do you offer options to? So, some form of incentive, stock options. When, how, and who?
So as a founder, how do you think about using options?
Sure.
So your leadership team, for sure, your independent board members, and your team. So I like to think of options as a way to keep every employee that is highly valued and driven by options. Not all are. If I care about selling and I care about getting hitting quota and collecting $200,000 a year, I may not care about options, and I may leave if I can't hit my target. Most employees, though, if you value them as a company, as a startup, you don't want them to go away. You may not be paying the highest comp. I've seen, in particular with software companies, using options to retain software developers, where if your top developers leave and you bring in someone new to replace them, they are probably going to break code, and there's a big cost to that. So using options strategically to keep the people that you want and that will be motivated by options is really fundamental. Options are always used to keep and retain the leadership team as well.
Just a parting comment. One of the things that gets lost when you get in the weeds, I mean, that's the purpose of this, to get in the weeds. But one of the things that gets lost is, please don't do this if it's not fun. I mean, the reason almost everyone does this is because it's just boatloads of fun. It's like reading a novel. You don't know the end. You're about to invest a lot of time, in the case of a novel, and it's a story that's going to play out in ways that you don't know. So find an author you like on a topic you're interested in and follow along. If you're not having fun, you didn't do your due diligence and you shouldn't be in the deal.
Terrific. Well, we'll end the panel on that note. Thank you very much, and we'll invite up our next panel. Kate, we'll let you kick things off.
Hi, I'm Kate Volzer. I'm the CEO, co-founder of Wiser. We are a Fund 3 company at North Coast. We are also a portfolio member of Jumpstart in the Focus Fund, and then we have a number of angel investors. I've been running Wiser now for 2 years. We are still alive and thriving, so I'm very proud to still be up here today.
I'm Sam Gerace. I'm the CEO and founder of Convey, a North Coast portfolio company. I'm a North Coast Angel Fund member and have had the good fortune to start, grow, and sell and take public 4 companies before Convey.
Good evening, I'm Paul Hamerly. I'm a 1-year member of the North Coast Angel Fund, a 3-year member of the Canton, Ohio Impact Angel Fund. Previously was with 3 Fortune 500s, and I had 2 companies on my own, one in food and one in gasoline internal combustion engine technology. I'm just real pleased to be here.
Terrific. Well, Kate, we'll start with you. So you've been doing this for 2 years. You have your own board. Congratulations. What does your board do?
Well, what my board does now versus what they did at the beginning is a little bit different, I think. Board of directors, I think the question you gave me was, what's their purpose? And entrepreneurs are typically pretty excitable and kind of wide-eyed. And so what my board of directors did at the beginning for me was poke holes in our plan and ask kind of the hard questions that sometimes you don't really want to ask. So things like, what if things start going really, really poorly? What are your cut plans? And literally making you go line by line for who you'd fire or let go, whatever you want to call it, where you'd cut marketing spend and otherwise. So I think that very, very early, it's asking the hard questions that entrepreneurs may not want to ask of themselves. And then the company is so new that there's just a lot of stuff to set up governance-wise. And so it's thinking about where you are today, where you want to be in 2 years from now, and sort of setting a path for that chunk of time.
Great. And then Sam, you've been on both sides of this as an investor and the CEO. What is the role of an angel on the board specifically?
Wow, that's a good one. I've always viewed my boards as strategic. Some boards are governance only, and they're there for oversight. They protect an investor's interests, and I think that's important, especially at the angel stage. The company is early. We don't know how the story is going to end, as Charlie said, and it is obviously very important to have that sort of oversight. But you have the opportunity to impact the end of the story, and I think that's just as critical. Angels in particular may be domain experts in the particular area of business of the company, and they can add particular strategic value at that critical early stage. And so I think a smart entrepreneur who has the opportunity to take angel investment could look across the angels who invested and pick out some domain experts that can offer strategic value at a time when it is more impactful than any other. And so I think as angels or potential angels, you've got the opportunity to protect the interest of the entire angel fund, but at the same time to really know that you provided some strategic guidance that's material.
Great. And Paul, I know you're on several boards yourself. How involved do you like to be? What level of detail do you like to engage?
Well, I guess the first thing is I draw a distinction between board of directors and board of advisors. So board of directors is more of a fiduciary responsibility and governance. So the starting point for your involvement would be a line of demarcation that said this is the board and the board is independent and this is the management. Now, from there it can stray quite a bit based on does the management invite in more board participation. Also, there can be an emergency situation. There was a company I'm aware of that was having problems. The board was dysfunctional. They fired the CEO, and they appointed a board member to run the company. So in that case, this individual was the management, in addition. With regard to board of advisors, it's a lot looser. There isn't that fiduciary responsibility. I personally am a very strong advocate in having a board of directors and a board of advisors if you can manage it. I've had a lot of success recruiting, particularly retired folks, for a small amount of equity, or in some cases nothing, and you can get some really, just going on LinkedIn, you can get some world-class folks and the board of advisors. Now, those board of advisors may actually come into the company, work with the management, and I think that's, you know, appropriate.
And Sam, as an investor, how important is it, one, for you to be on the board personally, or for there to be a board, period, at the early stages of directors?
Yeah, look, well, for representing investors' interests, boards of directors are critical. My importance on the board, if I'm a domain expert, is going to be pretty important. It's just because I'm an angel investor, not important at all, but what is important to me is that a domain expert be on the board. As Michal said, if it's in food and I don't have domain expertise in food, look, I'll be happy to protect the other investors' interest, but I'm not going to add a lot of value. It's very important to me that we do have a food expert, say, on the board at that stage, and that's really how I think about it. It's all about domain expertise.
And Kate, what are the characteristics of a great director, right? When you see just the skill set interpersonally, how they approach things, what makes for a good director?
The domain expertise is helpful. I think also being super responsive. So as an early stage company, you're trying to move quickly and trying to get guidance quickly so that you can accomplish the next thing. So that's, responsiveness, any sort of expertise, network connections. So most folks that are appointed to a board have a lot of connections inside of their network. So for us, we sell into higher education institutions, and you're probably going to know several friends that are on boards of trustees at a university. And so that kind of introduction, something that would generate revenue for the company, is also extremely, extremely helpful.
Okay. And so Sam, as we think about after the investment, one of the ways that companies run into challenges is they burn money too fast, revenues don't grow as quickly. Either way, they have to raise capital, right? The more successful companies are, sometimes the more they need to raise capital in the near term. So as a director, how do you work with the companies, or how do you think you as an advisor or director should work with the companies to help them plan for a appropriate capital raise?
Yeah, I think this is one of the areas where at least first-time entrepreneurs, and sometimes subsequent entrepreneurs who really prefer to stay in their domain, benefit from board members. Most entrepreneurs know how to produce the product or technology that they have, but they don't necessarily understand either the strategic value of capital, especially subsequent capital, and they don't understand the tactics necessary to get the best value or to raise capital most effectively. And one of the worst things that can happen is that an entrepreneur who is responsible for driving the company has to spend more time than necessary raising capital. What that does is decelerate the company massively, and that's worse than a minor hit in valuation. So I think my job as a director, the job of any director, right, is to first of all help entrepreneurs understand strategic value, and then make sure that they spend as little time as possible to raise the necessary capital, to do everything you can to help keep them focused on that business. Including, and this is where directors added tremendous value the first time, right? I didn't know anything about raising money the very first time, and some of them came on the road with me, which added immense value, right? If you've got an entrepreneur who's a continuous learner, they'll pick it up quickly, but especially as angels, if you have experience, and you can go arm in arm with a first-time entrepreneur the first couple times, you will have multiplied your value substantially.
So the question for you, Paul. Kate mentioned responsiveness from investors and directors to the entrepreneur. We'll talk about the other direction for a moment, because I think we probably all experience situations where there's a terrific level of communication, engagement, and responsiveness right up to the moment where either the check clears or when things start to go in a way that's not as constructive with the company, right? It's harder to communicate bad news, it's harder to stay engaged. What type of baseline communication do you like to see, though? What information flow do you like to see from an entrepreneur after the investment?
Well, I worked for Jim Bigger, who's chairman of Nestle, and he had an adage that he says, I want to hear the bad news immediately, because then I can respond to it, and so if there's a crisis or an emergency, then I want to hear about it right away. And he went on to say, if there's good news, it'll bubble its way up and everybody will get the appropriate credit, which isn't always true. So I would say anything that is materially negative, but also materially positive. I think entrepreneurs live a very, very lonely, isolated life, and they need positive feedback. So if a board member can give that kudos, I think it keeps sustaining the entrepreneurs.
Go ahead. Let me add one thing. There's a lot of value created by serendipity or by ad hoc interaction. So I, as a board member, prefer when I'm a board member, I prefer over-communication. Neither I nor the entrepreneur know what all the board members can add to a particular situation. And I'm willing to, look, I get enough spam every day from things I don't want. I'm happy to throw that away. I like over-communication from companies I'm involved in, because it really, to me, every time that comes in, I'm saying, is there any way I can possibly add value? So I would encourage anybody who's involved to ask entrepreneurs to over-communicate. You asked, I think yes, maybe it was Michael earlier, about what red flags are. If in due diligence I am not getting the sense that an entrepreneur is going to communicate quickly or voluminously, that starts to be a red flag for me.
Do you expect that as an angel investor or just as a board member?
Oh, I expect it. As me, I over-communicate with my investors as well.
So Kate, to state the obvious, you are a CEO and you are a woman. We only have invested in 2 female CEOs out of our 49. Angel groups, venture capitalists are just historically bad at some combination of identifying, working with, funding, helping be successful. Not just women, but other underrepresented groups. So based on what you've seen, what should we be doing better, smarter, so that, one, we're giving all good entrepreneurs a fair shake, but 2, we're also not missing great investment opportunities by some level of either short-sightedness or inability to execute, to attract and work with high-quality women founders? That was the easy question, sorry.
You said it was going to be easier question. That is a kind of a big national problem, I think, obviously. I am very proud to say that there are a lot of women that are on my cap table, so they're at least involved in that capacity, some of whom are in the room today, so thank you for your investment. I think that as investors, take the meeting. I just wrote a LinkedIn post about this, but take the meeting. If a woman reaches out, whether you think it's a good idea or a shit idea, take the meeting and talk to them and maybe coach them through. I talk to a lot of women founders who are starting from basically zero and are asking questions like, well, I have this consulting practice. Should I raise money? No, you shouldn't raise money. You should go sell your consulting services. But it's not kind of a known across the board. And that's not necessarily just a female thing. That's a male thing as well. But so I think taking the meeting, but then also backing women that are going for it. So, check writing is super helpful. I've had a lot of female angels that have actually, and this is just something subtle that warms my heart, but I've had a lot of women investors that write their own checks without their husband's permission. I love it. It's kind of a double standard because you laugh that, if you were the man writing the check, it's not a thing. No one's asking your wife to co-sign your investment. So I don't know that that's particularly helpful, but introduce people, connect your daughters to me for internships. I will happily connect them to women that are not necessarily CEOs. I only know of maybe 3 actually female CEOs in Cleveland that are in startups.
Okay. So we'll do a couple lightning round questions, then we'll take questions from the group. How often should early stage boards meet? Just go right down now. Every day, every month, every quarter?
We try to check in monthly, sort of that heartbeat kind of matters. So we send a just the facts ma'am type email to our investor base and then a little bit more detail to our board of directors. And then, so monthly at least phone call and then quarterly in person, and some of it depends on what your terms of your investment say.
Monthly update, 6 times a year in person.
I would say monthly pre-revenue and post-revenue, and then you could move to quarterly if there's no pivot, if an original business plan is continuing to be executed.
Okay. And if on one extreme the style of the board is to be prescriptive and tactical versus on the other hand strategic and higher level, where do you think a board should be?
I don't think you have the luxury of really picking one. I think you have to. I know when people hit me with an idea, I try to simultaneously think about the tactics and the strategy at the same time. So I hate to avoid a clear answer, but I would say you really have to be mindful of both.
Yeah, sorry, I'm right with Paul. It's coach mentality, right? You're not on the field, but you've got to be thinking both tactically and strategically.
I'll pick a side. Let's go not prescriptive,
Okay. Very good.
mostly because you guys didn't pick a side.
So this will be an easy one, I promise. Board dinners, what do you think? Should there be a social periodic component to that board relationship, or should you just be in and out of your board meetings?
Weiser is having a 2-year-old birthday party this Friday at the corner alley. Our board members and their spouses are invited to drink beer and eat pizza with us. So I am pro dinners and fun.
Yeah, I don't know about all you board members out there, but for all the CEOs out there, this is a very important tool, right? That's the board meeting before the board meeting. Board dinner beforehand, always, always, always.
Yeah, I've been a member of 7 boards, 2 nonprofit and 5 for-profit. I've only really been privileged to have dinners with one of them, but it really does expand the understanding of the group and what you can talk about. So,
Great. All right, questions from the group? Yes?
What's the right number of board members for early stage company?
5 to 7.
We have 5. I don't know the right answer.
yeah, I would agree. Unless there's a complexity about the business that it would want you to have specialists in different areas, then maybe you reach up to 8 or 9 or 10, but I think pretty rare.
At North Coast, we assume that the default is going to be 5, that there will be 2 from the company, including the CEO, 2 investors, and then 1 independent. That's usually a balanced structure. And I think it's probably a math problem, but when you go from 5 to 7, simple things like scheduling meetings become exponentially more difficult. So 5 is usually a light on their feet type of group. Mike?
Does that include observers?
Not for me.
What's the board's role during a pivot? If the entrepreneur wants to, or thinks there needs to be a pivot, how does he or she utilize the board or vice versa?
Ideally, and no pun intended, as a sounding board, right? Because in that role, a fiduciary responsibility for the board is asking the question, is this a good spend of the investor's money? And if there has been money spent on some assets or development, can we make anything out of that? And do we have an obligation to do that on behalf of investors? And then you're in effect reassessing and doing due diligence on potentially a new idea or a substantially new concept. So on that one, you're thinking strategically. But the component that often, in my mind, gets missed is the board saying, we want to focus on this new pivot, but what is our fiduciary duty with regard to the assets that have been created thus far?
Never pivoted.
Nothing to add. Yeah, that sounds like a good answer. Yeah.
Clint?
Just curious how you think about how long you run with a CEO before you decide they're not doing the job.
Well, I would say one would be, I'd say milestones, effort, and communication would be, so in kind of in that order. If milestones are not achieved, then the question becomes, is the effort there? And if the answer is no, but the effort's there, then the question might be communication. If the performance milestone-wise of the company is not where it needs to be, then it seems to me it's on the CEO and management team to reach out, which means communicate more, not just with existing parties, but with others. So that would be kind of the sequence I would think of before, pushing someone out.
Toughest question so far, Clay. That's a tough one. Because in the case, for example, of a pivot, you can be facing an entirely different market, potentially an entirely different approach to the business. And so I do favor management by exception. I expect the CEO to understand the strategy. I expect them to articulate the near-term plan, and then I expect them to hit it. And to communicate with the board aggressively if there are any exceptions to that. And I think if we're clearly seeing exceptions that are not being communicated, or, and here's the big one, if you can't be convinced that the CEO strategy is the right strategy, I think you got to make the call. And that's probably the toughest call the board has to make.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. We are now ready for our fourth panel, also known as the last panel before we have the giveaway of Angel's Envy. So please stick around here. So Sam, we've already had a chance to get to know you. So why don't we, and Charlie. So we'll have Clay introduce himself to the group.
Hello, everybody. I'm Clay Rankin, co-founder and managing director of North Coast Angel Fund. Been doing this early stage investing now full-time for about 22 years, and this is my 30th year since I made my first angel investment.
So Clay, we've talked about that most individual deals will likely fail. So therefore, you need a lot of shots on goal. How do you think about developing a portfolio and a portfolio strategy as opposed to one or two individual investment decisions?
I think that was part of the fundamental thinking about how we formed North Coast Angel Fund in the first place. Most angel groups are really just clubs that get together as individuals. And the concern that I had with that is that most people don't have the time and the discipline to do the due diligence and invest in enough companies to really mitigate the risk of this kind of early stage investing. And the Angel Capital Association has done several studies now using Monte Carlo simulation and shown that really you need between 18 and 20 companies in your portfolio to begin to meaningfully mitigate the risk of this kind of investing. So you really have to ask yourself how much time you're willing to personally commit to investing in 18 to 20 companies. Here at North Coast has been in existence for 11 years, and we've invested in 49 companies. So it's a big undertaking, and I think it's one of the benefits of having an angel group that you're working with, because you can sort of spread the load across a number of people. But I think 18 to 20 is what I think is probably what you should be thinking about when you're putting together your own portfolio.
Charlie, for people who are relatively new and starting to get involved in angel investing, what are the biggest challenges they should be mindful of?
Well, I think this sounds like a commercial, but associating with an angel fund like North Coast is a great way to get your feet wet. Start with a diversified portfolio and start learning. But don't be afraid to take your own leaps. Like if you disagree with one of the North Coast investment a non-investment recommendation, feel free to go out there and invest in them anyway. I mean, it's supposed to be fun. You shouldn't be betting enough money, and I use the word betting on purpose. You shouldn't be betting enough money that the loss of that money will ruin your life. But if you find something, and the reason I say this is because the best ideas and the best returns will always fail a democratic process. Because if everybody thinks it's a good idea, it's almost by definition not a brilliant one. So if you're convinced that this is a great idea, go ahead and invest in it. Don't invest a lot, but invest some. But as great, as much as I respect the North Coast process, there's a flaw in a democratic process in this space. And it's not recognizing the wild-ass outliers. So if you... Sorry.
You mean to tell me you think the democratic process could produce a flawed result?
It's a political setup. No, I got nothing to do.
No, I think I'd also go back to something Charlie said before, which was, it is about having fun. And having done this for so many years, I really don't believe that you can pick winners. Most of the time, you're just plain going to be wrong. This is so hard to do, and what these entrepreneurs are trying to do is an incredible job that very few people can do. And so I think that you just have to be prepared mentally to say, I'm going to take my best shot, and I'm also going to take a shot that's fun to do. And some are going to work and some aren't. And we've certainly seen companies that have pivoted and failed, and others that have pivoted and been successful. It's just really hard to predict, and that's why I think the benefit of a portfolio is significant.
So Sam, as you make direct investments yourself, how do you think about reserving follow-on capital for those investments? Do you write one check and you're done, or are you assuming that you're along for a multi-year investment ride?
I think about it this way, that's where I make all the money. No kidding, because you can't pick winners the very first time. And as the second round or third round comes along, you're beginning to see differences in performance. And in effect, I've come to view that first investment as my reservation for the right to do a later investment. Those are fewer, you have slightly better visibility, the market has responded in some way. So I really do think about the fact, as I'm allocating money, that I don't want to allocate all my money in the first investment in every company. So I need to have a room for a second and a third set.
That's common, widely accepted wisdom, and probably right. I just happen to disagree with it. And I'll share that now. And I think it's more complicated than most people think it is, and no disparagement, but it's a risk reward. So as the certainty goes up, as Sam expressed, the reward also goes down. So it's more a factor of your risk tolerance, I think, than whether you reserve follow-on money. So I would rather, personally, this is not quite so much flash starts talking, but I would rather place more small bets on long shots than a 3-2 return on a company that's reduced all their risk. And it's, again, I hate to sound like a broken, you can't say broken record anymore. What do you say? What?
They're back.
Yeah, I guess so. Okay. I hate to sound like a broken record for those of you. I'll explain it later. But place those little bets and enjoy the ride. If that's your risk tolerance level.
Just to get a little further into the weeds, and then we'll move on. I do think, too, a little bit depends on the eventual financing that the company is going to need. As a company matures, it's showing a great deal of success, and now they're talking about bringing on significant institutional venture capital funding. What often happens to the early angel investor, if they don't participate, is they get crushed in those VC rounds of funding. So if you have no money reserved to at least do your pro rata share going forward, you really get hammered. So I think it's just a little permutation that you may not see as much, obviously, in the early stage.
Clay, we'll stay with you for a moment. So why do companies fail? What do you think are the most common reasons why some of these hockey stick projections, which we see at the beginning do not ultimately come to fruition?
I think more often than not, it really comes down to a lack of understanding of the market. And in many cases, it's very difficult to understand the market. But then failure to pivot when the CEO realizes that the market's not where he thought it was or she thought it was, and that failure to pivot is the kiss of death. In fact, I think you've got a personal experience, Sam, right now with Convey. And you're just seeing a nuance in the market, the retail piece of the market, that you hadn't seen before. And that's an important opportunity for you.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And it's not just, the word pivot is, I think, largely wrong because it implies quite a large turn. I think it's really responding agilely to information as it comes in. And there may be a significant response or a minor course correction. What Clay refers to is, we've got a new product in the market. It's an enterprise. It's a piece of enterprise software, and we started to see, and it has a front-end application for end users. And we started to see among the 8,000 people who are using the app a particular spike in retail, which was not a market we thought of at all. I mean, it's part of enterprise overall, but we didn't think on focusing it. All of a sudden, we're seeing an incredible network effect inside retail organizations. So the good news is I've got 5 experienced team members, and we dig into the data once a week. We look for indications like this once a week, and within 4 weeks, we altered the nature of our MVP to take this first entry point, and then we'll follow on in a few weeks with the full enterprise retail entry point. But that's the sort of thing as a board member, as an investor, I'm looking for, which is, can the team take data and respond, right? Whether it's a big change or just looking for quick opportunities.
And there's a saying that no business plan has ever survived contact with the real world. And it reminds me a little bit of the Mike Tyson comment, right? That everyone has a plan until they're punched in the face. And things change, to be sure. So, Charlie, when you look at your successes and your failures as an investor, are there commonalities or things you take away as an investor to say, I wish I'd done this differently, or I need to keep doing more of X?
Yeah, that's you sent that question around earlier. I didn't have a good answer for it then, and nothing has really bubbled up. I mean, the unique thing about being so far upstream for us is it's very, very hard to say, oh, I've seen this before. And I was at an event earlier today where they brought up the similarity between this and raising children. The minute you have a second child, you realize that they're just not the same. And the rules that worked with the first one totally don't work with the second. And if you have more than 2, God knows, it just exponentially explodes. So startups are almost exactly the same way. And if we have a mantra that we live by at Flash Starts, is that every single startup is different. And their critical path to success or failure is different. And our job as mentors and early stage investors is to identify what critical path this particular startup needs to follow to be successful. So, I wish I had a playbook, but I don't, because the variables exceed my ability to process them. So we look at each company uniquely and try to figure out what is the unique path for that company. And in the end, you just want your startups to be happy. That's kids, sorry.
Profitable.
We'll do a couple lightning round questions, and then we'll look to the larger group here for questions. What's the biggest impediment to getting more angel investors in the game?
Risk aversion. I think most angel investors are not comfortable waiting 5 to 10 years to get a return on their investment.
I was going with celebration. I do not believe we tell the story as well as we should. North Coast does it better than most, but I think in general, I think there are plenty of people who don't know what fun it can be.
Yeah, I think risk aversion is exactly the answer. I mean, particularly on the West Coast, oh yeah, that's an interesting idea. Here's a $50,000 check. That doesn't happen here, and it's both good and bad. I mean, we're more rigorous about it than a lot of West Coast investors. But I think as long as you set the dollar amounts right, you can reduce the risk factor. And as long as you're in it to enjoy the trip and the ride and get an education out of it, it's money well invested.
So acknowledging your point earlier that if everyone agrees it's a great idea, it's probably not a great idea. And that sometimes the best ideas are the ones that seem crazy at the time. What's the craziest idea you've ever been presented?
So this one I thought about. There have been a lot, but by far the craziest one is we run some wacky pitch competitions sometime, and one of the ones we ran was at a Tech Pint event where entrepreneurs go to a bar and drink beers, and there's like 300 of them there. So we went to this Tech Pint event, and we had a pitcher contest, and we filled pitchers with $20 bills. And we gave away $1,000 in $20 bills to the winner of this pitch competition. And we took audience members who just raised their hand and said, come on up and give your pitch. It was kind of like karaoke for startups. And they came up, or open mic for startups. And this one guy came up and he pitched an idea for using termite spit to generate biofuel. And he had me at termite spit. I was like, are you kidding me? So we didn't actually invest, but he's still working on the concept. So termite spit is the strangest one I ever had.
I can't top that, but in my experience, the ones that seem really wacky tend to come around. I had somebody pitch me 30 years ago an alternative form of currency. It was not alternative currency as today. It was physical currency, but it had an electronically recognizable component. So think of it as a dollar bill that a computer could recognize. And the funny thing is, if you take away the physical aspect of it, that's Bitcoin today.
We probably had a couple, but one was a group that showed up literally at our door unannounced and said, our idea is a flying car. So that didn't get too far. But I think the toughest one was the organic bra strap.
It's been an interesting 10 years. All right. So with that, we're going to look for a few more questions from the group here. I think anything is in bounds. Mike?
When you look back at the failures that have occurred over your careers, do you typically look back and say, boy, we should have seen that? Or do you typically look back and say, boy, we didn't see that coming?
Always we look back and say, oh, we knew that was going to happen. Thank you for laughing.
I think I have a nuanced version of that. It's, there are a few times when we should have brought in perhaps a domain expert or two, and we didn't do it early enough. And for those, and in all candor, that's probably the two things I look at as the greatest as the greatest investment failures I have. It was for that reason. I got to thinking I was smart in general, right? I mean, if you have successes in your domain, that's great. That does not translate to success outside your domain, and it's really good to get it in. So that, I would argue it was we should have seen that, not we should have seen that coming. We should have brought in someone who could have seen that coming.
And as I mentioned earlier, I think it's almost impossible to pick the winners. But I do think that we've had several situations where we've let the CEO ride too long and just didn't want to recognize the fact that it was time to make a change.
I was going to make a point and ask a question. So this idea of failure and why companies fail, there was a good TED Talk about 3 years ago that did a study on this, some of you may remember. As I recall, they looked at 5 different things that may have led to success or failure, and they surprisingly came up with the number one item was the timing of and so I guess, I don't think we formally look at that at North Coast. I mean, I'm not saying we don't look at it, but I don't know that it's it's its own separate category. So I guess I'd love to hear a little comment on does that have any merit? I mean, I don't know where that study came from, but it was out of nowhere.
As the North Coast Due Diligence team will tell you, there's a slide in my deck, and it goes like this: Why now? That's the title. Why now? Right?
I may have missed that, Sam. I apologize.
And here's the thing. You can be, since we do so much of it here in Cleveland, right? You can be the best surfer in the world. You can have the best board. It can be perfectly waxed, and you can be on the water. No wave, no surfing. And that's about timing. You can have a great team, you can have a great product. I know a phenomenal entrepreneur who has kind of eagle vision to the horizon, and he saw a market emerging. And you can be 2 years, you may have to persevere a long time if you spot that wave way off in the distance. And that's a problem, because as angel investors, we're in there early, right? We're the ones who are persevering with that person. So timing is important. It's not under anybody's control, and you've got to be decent wave spotters.
Yeah, we actually spend a huge amount of time with our startups because they are more likely than not to be too early, because they are, by definition, at the very beginning. So we spend a lot of time trying to come up with beachheads that will allow them to last long enough until the waves start coming in. That's a key focus. That's a pretty common theme across our companies. Yes, you've identified a potentially huge future market. Yes, you have a good team, but getting there from here is an unknown distance. So you need to have a series of steps that will generate revenue, so you don't have to take incredibly dilutive follow-on funding or self-interest of the CEO get replaced. So a lot of our mentoring and consulting is involved with, how do you reduce the risk of being too early? Because more often than not, they are more likely too early than wrong.
I'm just going to ask Sam to briefly talk about one of the things that he did with his company, Convey. And I think if more of these startups did this, it would be very effective. And that is to actually go out in the marketplace and have your due diligence list that you're doing as the entrepreneur on the market itself. You might just talk briefly.
Yeah, look, I'm a biochemist by degree and an empiricist by nature. We started out by interviewing 20-odd C-suite executives with an hour or two in-depth interviews, and we used that to frame an electronic interview that we then gave to 300 business people. Didn't start on code line one, frankly, didn't invest much in the business till we had done that. And what we wanted to hear from people is we're wave spotting, right? We knew there was a need. The question is the need now or is it not now? Was the market in a state? And our business happens to depend on sales, marketing, and service automation. It's the largest component of enterprise SaaS software. It's a $36 billion a year market. It's got a problem. The question is the problem big enough that is the problem large enough that the people who are paying $36 billion a year for that stuff are willing to solve it? And that's what we were trying to get out there. Are you willing to pay money this year for it or not? And now we have 10, anyway. Yeah. So that's it. It really is, and that's all about wave spotting. It's all, you have to get it right.
Great. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate everyone's contributions here tonight. Stay where they are for just a moment while we go through the next important step. And I didn't tell you this, Kate, but I'm going to ask you to help us out with one part of this. Because as we...
Drink that.
Not where I'm going.
Because I know some founders that like angels.
No, so I'm remiss in not asking Kate to share with... Well, actually, we'll get there. To share with us a 30-second view of what Wiser does and how you all can help because it is a community here. Everyone here, well, it's not a simple. How many people here went to college? Okay, you can all be helpful to this company. What we're going to do is I'm going to ask everyone on the panel to mix these up a little bit. Kate's going to tell you how you can help, and then she will select the recipient of the Angels Envy.
I hope I pick myself, because I'm selfish like that. So Wiser, we help students get connected with alumni for advice related to their professional careers, future or internship or otherwise. We also create alumni networks now, so some schools buy us just primarily to let their alumni who are recent grads connect with more senior alumni. So we work with schools like Case Western, Ashland, Notre Dame College, Oberlin, Denison, University of Chicago, St. Michael's College in Vermont, the University of Colorado, Denver, and soon quite a few other state institutions, which is new for us. We can always use introductions into directors of alumni associations. They typically have more money to write us checks faster. If you need an introductory email, I wrote documentation for Todd, and Todd, you can just share that with the whole group. If you are also a member of a national fraternity or sorority, we actually just closed a deal with Delta Kappa Epsilon for about $15,000 a year, and they went through our process in 17 business days, and I got their check in the mail today. So who knew? Fraternities and sororities are very similar and move equally quickly. So if you have a contact, the executive director at your nationals office would be ideal. So director of alumni relations at an institution or executive director at a fraternity or sorority.
Terrific. So this has been mixed by 3 people, and you are selecting one name, and let's see if they're in the room.
It's actually me. I drink wine now. I'm more mature these days. Scott Flam.
Scott is not here tonight. He
joking.
sent his
Scott.
regrets earlier.
I pick another non-attendee. I'm keeping it. Oh, Nyan Shah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Yes. Well, thank you very much again. We appreciate everyone else coming out. Please fill out your surveys, and look forward to seeing you at the next Angel Education event.